He married her for a corporate contract. She married him to save her father. Their vows were a business deal. Their touches were for the public. But last night, he whispered her name in the dark, and it wasn't part of the deal. The look in his eyes was real, and this morning she found the contract, torn in half. This is the story of how a lie became the most beautiful truth of their lives. A story of a love so powerful it shattered every clause and condition. If you believe that the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the deepest love, then you need to hear this. This is the kind of story we live for on this channel. Stories that prove love is the greatest deal you'll ever make. Subscribe to Mr. Cael Stories now, and don't miss a single moment of this breathtaking journey. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of dreamers. To understand how they got here, we must go back to the beginning, when Julian Thorne was not a man in love, but a fortress of a man, sealed shut by betrayal. His first marriage had been a carnage of the heart, leaving him believing that love was a strategic weakness he could not afford. His empire, Thorne Global, was under siege, and its ancient bylaws demanded a CEO be wed. So he devised a new strategy. A merger, not of hearts, but of mutual need. He had his lawyer draw up the most ironclad document imaginable. It outlined everything: separate bedrooms, public appearances, a strict code of conduct, and on the last page, a single clinical requirement: an heir within 2 years. It was a business transaction, pure and simple. The search was efficient, discreet. They needed someone intelligent, presentable, and, most importantly, with a pressing need that would guarantee their compliance. They found her in Sloane Rossi, Sloane, whose world was a quiet, desperate struggle, a brilliant financial mind buried in a cubicle, working late not for ambition, but to keep her ailing father in a clinical trial that was his only hope. Her life was a ledger of debts and prayers. The day Julian Thorne called her into his sky-high office, she felt like a small bird flying into a gilded cage. He was imposing, his presence a physical weight in the room. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a frost she could feel from across his mammoth desk. He didn't offer pleasantries. He offered a deal. He slid the contract toward her. 2 years of your life. His voice was low, devoid of warmth. In return, all your father's debts cleared. The best medical care in the world. A future for him, and financial security for you. For life. Sloane's fingers trembled as she touched the paper. The numbers on the page were a fortune. The terms were dehumanizing. But as she read the clause about her father's medical care, a single clear thought crystallized in her mind. This was not a choice. It was a sacrifice she would make in a heartbeat. She looked up, meeting the storm in his eyes. And what is required of me exactly? Your time, your presence, your loyalty to the company, he stated. Then, after a heavy pause and a child, to secure the succession. The air left her lungs. She had expected it, but hearing the words aloud made them terrifyingly real. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you are exceptional, yet unknown, and because you are loyal," he said, and for a fleeting moment she saw something in his gaze, not calculation, but a profound understanding of the weight of loyalty. "You have a reason to say yes that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with love. That is the only thing I can trust." In that moment, Sloane saw not just the powerful CEO, but a man who had been so wounded by a lie that he now sought truth in the raw, desperate motives of others. She picked up the pen. It felt like picking up her own chains. And she signed her name. She had just agreed to marry a stranger. She had no idea she was signing a contract with destiny itself. The wedding was a swift, elegant affair in a judge's chamber. There were no family photos, no tearful vows, no kissing the bride. There were only signatures and a quiet, profound shift in both their destinies. Sloane wore a simple, expensive cream-colored dress she'd never have chosen for herself. Julian looked every bit the powerful executive, his smile a practiced, polite curve for the required photographs. That evening, they moved her few belongings into his penthouse. It was a stunning space, all sharp angles, floor-to-ceiling glass, and cold marble. It felt more like a museum than a home, a monument to a man who had built walls not just of steel and glass, but around his own heart. Their lives fell into a sterile rhythm. By day they were CEO and Mrs. Thorne, a picture of united power. Sloane, using her financial expertise, began working alongside him, her keen mind quickly proving to be an asset he hadn't anticipated. They navigated galas and boardrooms, their public touches perfectly choreographed, his hand on the small of her back, her light laugh at his jokes. It was a performance, and they were both leading actors, but in the penthouse, the silence was deafening. They inhabited separate wings. Meals, when shared, were polite and brief, conversations revolving solely around business or the logistics of their charade. He called her Sloane. She called him Julian. The distance between them felt like a vast frozen ocean. Yet, even in the deepest frost, the smallest crack can let in the light. It happened on a rainy Tuesday, 3 weeks in. Sloane had just gotten off a video call with her father. The experimental treatment was grueling, and hearing the strain in his voice, seeing the fatigue in his eyes, had shattered her composure. She thought she was alone, curled up on the massive leather sofa in the living room. Tears she'd held back for weeks, finally falling in silent, helpless waves. She didn't hear Julian enter. He'd come home early, a rare occurrence. Sloane? She jolted, hastily wiping her cheeks, but it was too late. He stood there, his overcoat damp with rain, his briefcase forgotten in his hand. The usual mask of detached control was gone, replaced by something uncertain, almost wary. "I'm fine," she said, her voice thick. "It's nothing." He didn't accept that. He never accepted surface-level answers in business, and in this moment he seemed to reject it in his personal life too. He came closer, not intruding on her space, but standing as a solid, silent presence. "Your father?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. That simple question, asked with a tone she'd never heard from him before, broke the last of her defenses. She nodded, unable to speak, wrapping her arms around herself. Julian didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell her it would be okay. Instead, he did something that shocked them both. He walked to the wet bar, poured a single glass of amber whiskey, and brought it to her. "Here," he said, his fingers brushing against hers as she took the glass. The contact was a tiny spark in the gloom. "The doctors I hired are the best in the world. He's in capable hands." It wasn't a promise of a miracle. It was a statement of fact. But it was laced with an unspoken promise. "I am handling this. You are not alone in this burden." She took a sip, the liquor warming a path through her cold anxiety. "Thank you," she whispered, meeting his gaze. And in that moment the dynamic shifted. The storm in his eyes had quieted, not to a flat calm, but to a deep, watchful intensity. He was seeing her, not his contract wife, not an employee, but her. Sloane, a woman scared for her father, trying to be brave. He didn't retreat to his office. He sat in the armchair opposite her, and they sat in a comfortable, understanding silence, listening to the rain patter against the windows. The vast, frozen ocean between them hadn't melted, but for the first time, a single, fragile bridge had been built across it. It was the first crack in his armor, and the first ember of something real flickering to life in the coldness of their arrangement. Isn't it amazing how the smallest moment of understanding can change everything? That simple act of seeing someone's pain and just being there. If this story is touching your heart, if you're rooting for Julian and Sloane to find their way to each other, then please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to Mr. Cael Stories. Your support helps me bring more of these beautiful stories to you. The bridge built in the rain that night did not collapse. Instead, day by day, they began to cross it. Their dinners lasted longer. Conversations strayed from business to books, to art, to childhood memories shared with a hesitant vulnerability. Julian discovered Sloane had a wit that could make him laugh. A true, unguarded sound that was becoming his new favorite melody. Sloane saw past the Wolf of Wall Street to the man who carried the weight of his entire world on his shoulders with a quiet, stoic grace. The corporate war with his rival, Alistair Vance, intensified. One evening, as they worked late in his home office, a crisis erupted. A key investor, spooked by vicious rumors spread by Vance, was threatening to pull out, a move that could trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. Julian was a force of nature, his voice cutting and calm on the speakerphone, his mind racing through strategies. Sloane, without being asked, was already at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up financial models and historical data to counter the investors' fears. For an hour, they were a single unit, their minds perfectly aligned. He would throw out a figure. She would instantly provide the context. He would outline a strategic concern. She would already have the relevant risk analysis on his screen. Finally, the call ended. The investor was staying. For now. The silence that followed was electric, buzzing with shared adrenaline. The penthouse was dark, the only light coming from their computer screens, painting their faces in soft blue and white. Julian leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He looked at her, and the storm in his eyes was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated awe. "You were incredible," he said, his voice low and rich with something that sounded like reverence. "So were you," she replied, her heart pounding not from the crisis, but from the way he was looking at her. He stood and walked around the desk, stopping before her chair. He didn't speak. He simply reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, a touch so tender it made her breath catch. It was the first time he had initiated contact outside of their public performance. "Sloane," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. That was all it took. The last of her defenses crumbled. She rose to her feet, closing the small distance between them. She placed a hand on his chest, feeling the frantic, steady beat of his heart neath her palm. It matched her own. "Julian," she whispered back, an answer and an invitation. When his lips met hers, it was not like their first, cautious kiss. This was a confluence. It was hunger and relief, passion and discovery. It was the dam breaking after weeks of tension, of stolen glances, of unspoken longing. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him, and she melted into his strength, her hand tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. This kiss was a conversation, one they had been waiting their whole lives to have. It spoke of loneliness acknowledged, of walls willingly torn down, of a desire that went far beyond the physical. He broke the kiss, his forehead resting against hers, their breath mingling in the dim light. "The contract," he breathed, a final weak protest from the man he used to be. "Forget the contract," she said, her voice firm yet soft. "This is just us, Julian and Sloane." A shudder ran through him. In her words, he found his absolution. He swept her into his arms and carried her to his bedroom, their bedroom, from that night forward. What followed was a slow, profound exploration. There was no rush, only a reverent unveiling. He worshipped her with his hands and his mouth, learning the landscape of her body, committing every sigh, every tremble to memory. And she, in turn, discovered the man beneath the power suit, the surprising gentleness in his strong hands, the vulnerability in his eyes when he was above her, the whispered words of praise that were more intoxicating than any champagne. They made love not as business partners fulfilling a clause, but as two souls finally, desperately finding their way home. In the quiet aftermath, as he held her, her head on his chest, their limbs entwined, the world felt new. The arrangement was ashes. What burned between them now was real, and it was terrifyingly, beautifully powerful. But just as the first light of dawn tinted the sky, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from his head of security. Alistair Vance had just acquired another key supplier. The war was far from over, and their newfound love was about to become his greatest vulnerability and her most dangerous battleground. Have you ever experienced a moment that changed everything? A single touch, a single look that rewrote your entire story. That's the power of real connection. If you're feeling that connection to Julian and Sloane's journey, please share this video with a friend who appreciates a deep romantic story. And comment below with the word love if you're rooting for them to overcome whatever comes next. The world outside their bubble was turning hostile. Alistair Vance's attacks grew bolder, more personal. Yet, within the walls of the penthouse, a new world had blossomed. Julian and Sloane were no longer playing roles. They were living a truth that felt more real than anything they had ever known. His touches were no longer for show. They were a constant, quiet claim. A hand on her waist as he poured his morning coffee. A kiss to her temple as she worked. His arms pulling her close every night, as if she were his anchor in the gathering storm. But love, once it exposes your heart, makes it terrifyingly vulnerable. The threat Vance posed was no longer just to a company. It was to this fragile, newfound paradise. The breaking point came not with a corporate maneuver, but with a name from the past. Sloane, using her unparalleled skills to trace Vance's financial web, found a hidden thread. It led to a series of shell companies, and then to a name that made her blood run cold. Rossi Innovations. It was her late father's failed company, a dream that had collapsed into bankruptcy and debt over a decade ago. "Julian," she said, her voice trembling as she called him over to her screen. "Look at this. Vance didn't just bankrupt my father's company. He systematically dismantled it. He stole his patents, his research. He ruined him." Julian's face hardened as he read the data. The pieces began to snap into a horrifying new picture. This wasn't random. He didn't just find you during our search. Sloane, he orchestrated this. He knew your background, your desperation. He likely manipulated the data to make you the prime candidate for the contract. The air left her lungs. The room seemed to tilt. Her entire marriage, the very foundation upon which she had built her new life, was not just a business decision by Julian, but a malicious chess move by his enemy. She had been a pawn, delivered to Julian's doorstep, by the man who destroyed her family. She stumbled back from the desk, wrapping her arms around herself. All this time, I thought I was making a choice to save my father, but I was just playing into his hands. Our entire relationship, it started as his scheme. The words tasted like ash. Julian moved toward her, but she flinched away, the pain in her eyes a physical blow to him. "Don't you see?" she cried, tears finally falling. "None of this is real. It was all built on his lies. How can you even look at me? How can you trust that anything I've ever said or done wasn't part of his plan?" This was the moment. The test the narrator had asked about at the very beginning. When the foundation of a relationship is built on lies, how can you trust anything was real? Julian did not hesitate. He closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face, forcing her to look at him. His eyes, usually a stormy gray, were clear and fierce, burning with a conviction that stole her breath. "Look at me, Sloane," he commanded, his voice low and unwavering. "You listen to me. He may have written the first page of this story, but we have written every single page since. What is between us, what I feel when I hold you, what I see in your eyes when you look at me, the way you've made this cold, empty place feel like a home. That is the most real thing I have ever known in my entire life." He brushed her tears away with his thumbs. "Vance gave me a transaction, but you gave me back my soul. He didn't create this. He has no power over this. The only choice that matters is the one we make right now. Do we let his poison destroy what we've built, or do we fight for it?" In his words, she found her truth. The contract was Vance's scheme, but the love was theirs. It was born in shared silences, in whispered secrets in the dark, in the way he now looked at her as if she were the entire world. She launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his neck, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing universe. "I choose you," she whispered against his skin. "I choose us." He held her tightly, a warrior claiming his queen. "Then together," he vowed, his voice a low rumble of promise, "we end this." When faced with a truth that could destroy everything, they chose each other. They chose love. Isn't that the ultimate test? What would you choose? If this story has captured your heart, if you believe in the power of love to conquer even the most carefully laid lies, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. United, they became an unstoppable force. Sloane's heartbreak was forged into a razor-sharp weapon. Using her intimate knowledge of Vance's methods and the emotional motivation of her father's legacy, she orchestrated a financial counterattack so precise, so devastating, it left Vance no room to maneuver. Julian, with the full force of his will and resources, backed her every move, his trust in her absolute. The final battle was not in a dark alley. but under the bright lights of a shareholder meeting, Julian stood at the podium. But it was Sloane who stepped forward to present their case. With calm authority, she laid bare Vance's entire conspiracy, the corporate espionage, the manipulation, the ruthless destruction of her family's company to create a pawn in his game. She didn't just present numbers. She told a story of betrayal and resilience, and in doing so, she stripped Vance of his power. The board saw not a cold CEO's wife, but a partner of immense strength and integrity. Vance was ousted, his reputation in ruins. In the victorious silence that followed, Julian looked at Sloane, and the last of his walls crumbled to dust. He didn't care about the company in that moment. He only cared about the woman who had fought for him, for them, with everything she had. Weeks later, on the terrace of their penthouse as the sun set, bathing the city in gold, Julian got down on one knee. He wasn't the Wolf of Wall Street. He was just a man, vulnerable and hopeful, holding a new ring, a band of intertwined platinum and rose gold, symbolizing their two lives forged into one. The first time I asked, it was a transaction, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This time, it's a question from my soul. Sloane Rossi, you are my strength, my heart, my unexpected miracle. Will you marry me? Again, for real this time, forever. Through happy tears, her answer was a breathless, yes, 1,000 times, yes. Their second wedding was everything the first was not. Filled with laughter, with her father healthy and beaming, with real vows spoken from the heart. The contract that had once bound them was framed and hung in Julian's office, not as a reminder of a business deal, but as a monument to the most beautiful risk he ever took. And so, the man who married for a corporate contract received the one thing his wealth could never buy, a love that was real. He thought he was building a shield, but he was actually building a home. He thought he was closing a deal, but he was actually opening his heart. The moral of their story isn't that love conquers all in a fairy tale sense. It's that real love is a conscious choice. It's choosing to be vulnerable when you've been hurt. It's choosing to trust when you've been betrayed. It's choosing to see the person behind the pain and to let them see you in return. Their love didn't start with a spark. It was built moment by moment, choice by choice, until it became an unshakable force. If this story reminded you that the greatest risks often lead to the greatest rewards, then share this message of hope and love with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, if you believe in second chances and unexpected love. And subscribe to Mr. Cael Stories for more tales that explore the beautiful, complex landscape of the human heart. Tell me in the comments, what choice has led to the greatest love in your life? Remember, the most beautiful stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about imperfect people choosing each other again and again.